Welcome to the Paradox Port podcast, where we explore magical, whimsical ideas changing the way we learn and grow, and some of the people behind them. Today, my guest is Richard Durham. Richard, it's a pleasure to have you on.
I'm always happy to have a conversation with you, all right, and frankly, this is going to be no different. I'm excited.
Amazing to hear. Richard here, from my perspective, is kind of a bit of a wizard. He brings magic and intentionality into everything he does, and I just wanted to have him on here to have a bit more of a wide-ranging conversation on the topic of games, and kind of more specifically how they can help us navigate complexity and just in general some of the stickiest challenges that humanity is currently facing. But before we dive in, Richard, just take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a couple of the ideas that you're currently working on.
Sure. Thanks, Harry. So I am, like a lot of people, very intersectional, right? So I'm working across. My history works across spaces of being an educator for many years, working in higher education, working in kind of psychology of learning, working across games for, of course, again, like a lot of people who make games since I was a child and just never stopped, right? And as a result, blending those kind of things, again, quite common. You start looking at games as a function of learning, right? Or one of those enjoyments of learning. So I've taken all of these lenses of education, of learning, I have a science teaching background, and kind of blended into games where they're not transformational games might be a bit a bit too much to say, because those are kind of a specific genre, right? And serious games is a bit of a nothing title, but the idea that you can make games that ask questions, so critical games, critical play, this idea that you use them both as an outlet as an artist to create something that is meaning to you and to process something, but also that it evokes emotion or action or ideas in other people who engage with them. And as such, they can be transformative, and as such, they might be taken very seriously. But in the end, they're just games. They're just art in some case. So I'm making games specifically that help kind of deconstruct social dynamics, or games that work with complex situations and help people who are in those situations or aren't familiar with them to engage with those complex situations. So it helps facilitate decision making and complexity, and humans have a lot of complexity around it. And I know that's a bit of a buzzword as well, so we can break that down too if you want to later. But the basic idea is making games for purposes without making them just utilitarian, just by making games as art that are also useful.
You mentioned the words transformational games and serious games. Are those names that are actually used in the industry or just in general? And if so, like, what do they mean, and why did you kind of slightly scoff at them?
Yeah, well, I'm not slightly scoffing at transformational games. I'm slightly scoffing at serious games, because that title was created almost as the antithesis of games are frivolous, right? And it was meant to have games that are used in serious, like a serious context. So you're looking at games that are like, we're going to use this as a training exercise, or we're going to use this as this game as a way of engaging in some sort of simulation, or we're going to, and it just became a way of co-opted by business generally as a title, and it became so wide-reaching by practitioners that it just became almost a useless title, right? In the same way that like games itself invoked a lot of idea of frivolity, which is not what games do at all, real in reality, right? There's a whole spectrum, multi-spectrums, and serious games just became not a great title for the things it do, because it became equated instead of just related to training games, like games you might use to say, I'm going to run you through a simulator of a checkout counter at the grocery store so that you can become a better checkout grocer, right? And I have made those, I might add. But and so the idea then of what a transformational game is, and I might note, you can get a master's degree in transformational games and transformational play, right? So it's a recognized title by accredited institutions in a way where you're using games and play to help instigate and to create them as tools and experiences to help instigate change within people. right? And large groups of people. So transformational games like Uppsala University, for instance, you can get a degree in. And that's what, those are great. Those are great things. They often tend to be a lot more on the role-playing side of things, and very facilitated. And I say tend to, they don't have to. Transformational games could be, of course, like a solo role-playing game book, for instance, right? But the idea of transformational games are very much like the intent is to transform the user, the players, in some way, or for them to use it as a tool to do so. Whereas the games that I'm doing are maybe sometimes that, but not necessarily intentionally to do that, as much as I could separate the games that I'm doing and say, well, sometimes I'm just talking about concepts and I want people to understand the concepts. And sometimes that's about just giving people a vocabulary to talk about a complex situation. And if you give them the vocabulary, then they can start to talk about it. And if they can start to talk about it, then they might be able to transform their behaviors within that complex system. So it's on the road to transformative. For instance, might be a game I know I've talked to you about, Ari, which is this game about double binds. And that's a good example of what I mean, is that I'm not necessarily trying to transform individuals through it or have them do a lot of self-reflection, but I am trying to expose a communication dynamic in that game.
Right. That's interesting because this is just coming to me now as you were talking about the sort of like various phases of where a game can intersect with someone. Like it can just give them the language to talk about something. But as you were talking, I kind of thought like maybe there's a few steps to that, where like the first could be just giving people language to talk about complexity or to talk about, whatever confusing dynamics they might find themselves in. But then there's kind of the next phase that is maybe giving people like some practice on how they might navigate those things in their life, or just, understanding the various dynamics and how they feel as they're arising. And then maybe the third one is like over time kind of helping people build up like a muscle memory, sort of, for like, oh yeah, like I'm in this situation that triggers me to feel this way and I should do X, Y, and Z and those sorts of things. I don't know if that's a remotely relevant taxonomy, but would be curious to hear if something along those lines kind of might resonate with you.
I mean, regardless of the taxonomy, we are looking at like the specific taxonomy, the idea of like how do people get better at responding into situations when they haven't been in that situation before, right? Is that kind of where you're aiming at, right? And so that, yeah, I'd say games are absolutely used for that. Absolutely. In the same way that like and yeah, the games that I'm making are all along that kind of a spectrum. Right, and that is, I suppose, transformative games. So maybe I'm underselling what I'm doing, and they are transformative games. The idea that you can give people, here's where I think it goes awry, maybe, right? Because there's different kinds of skills you can get in things, right? And if you're in a flight simulator, right, and we just had the Artemis 2 mission, right? It's still going on. I think they haven't landed yet. Landing soon. There are a huge number of simulators, right, that they're going into that. And there's a lot of muscle memory and a lot of skills that come into that, and a lot of like, how do you deal with a crisis situation that are coming into that? Incredibly valuable and incredibly constrained situation, right? And so very useful. I say constrained the situation in terms of like, you're going to be in this pod, right? And you're going to be using these controls, and you need to master a large number of what are the functions on this thing, right? Or what in the controls, right? You need to understand the technologies, right? In the interfaces. And so you've got to practice using the interfaces in multitude of ways. There's no getting around that. Like if you're going to be at the checkout and at the grocery and you got high number of customers coming through, you need to become a master at using that checkout machine through a lot of varied experiences, right? That's one level of mastery that you can get through simulation. And then pressuring that simulation so that people can use the controls in different ways completely. Where I want to go back in terms of like transforming humans themselves, like the kind of like concepts that we hold and the identities that we hold, it's a completely different kind of game. And I don't know if going through a flight simulator and becoming a master at that skill and at the skill set there is going to change your identity. Beyond like, I am now a master of this this thing. I am an astronaut. I can do this, right? Or I know how to do the checkout counter. Stand back. Hold on, everybody. I can handle the checkout. But this idea of like what kind of how you approach situations. Like, does that mean that you approach every situation as if it was a checkout, or as if it was a space capsule? Probably not. Right? It doesn't change the way you approach novel situations. So that's a different stage in the development, which you were talking about.
Right.
How do we become master at something? We can do it through immersive simulations where you just feel like you're there in this hyper-specific situation. And the translatability, the generalizability of those kind of situations are probably quite low, right? It's high expertise needed, low transferability. And what we're looking at is how can we have training people in, say, to be a scientist involves a lot of mindset. Like, how do you approach situations with a lot of more questions than answers? Like any answer really just begs more questions. Or how do you gather a lot of evidence before you make a decision? Right? These are kind of scientific mindsets of like, make lots of observations. Don't jump to conclusions. Right? And having people who do that across many different experiments, many different, like, that's a mindset training that is quite useful to have. And I think it's encapsulated probably by some popular science experts who talk about different mindsets people can have, where you can have a scientist mindset, you can have a lawyer mindset, you can have like a politician mindset where you're arguing everything all the time. And if you get used to doing those kinds of things, then yeah, that can ingrain in your communication dynamic, right? And so like, I always tend to sit back and gather lots of evidence before I make any kind of decision, right? Or I try to determine, there's a black and white, I try to determine right and wrong situation. That's a lawyer mindset, right? And so you get those kind of things which you can change and train, but over a long period of time in many varied contexts, right? Where you're just training the approach, and those are transformative games at a different level, a different mindset level. But how do you do that? How do you make a game that does that? You don't. It's like exposure to many different types of games, in complexity, right? So like, if you have this whole field of science, right? Yeah.
But you can make games that somewhat like straddle the middle ground there a little bit, where it's a little bit more broad than a flight simulator, right? But like what you were talking about with your game that you're working on right now, where it's not teaching you how to do a specific task, but nor is it teaching you how to be like a fully functional scientist or something. It's kind of in the middle, where it's teaching you how to understand and deal with a specific kind of human experience, which in this case is double binds. So how do you go about thinking about designing a game like that, like where it sits kind of in the middle? It is something that you can consistently recognize and learn to recognize and build up the ability to kind of know what you might do in those situations, but you're never gonna grok the entire thing. It's it's not like you're gonna come out a transformed person, rather. So yeah, what goes into creating a game like that focuses on one kind of specific human dynamic or issue that people tend to face?
Yeah, good question. I can't say that there's a singular approach to this, right? I can talk about an approach I use specifically for that game, right? And maybe I should talk about that game a little bit too, just so, since I know that we've talked about it. Right?
Give a couple minutes, just overview of what that game's all about.
So the game is called Welcome to Pinnacle Biogenics, and it's a small deck-based role-playing game that takes about 45 minutes to play with a small group of people, like up to 4 or 5. And the idea with this game was to give players the vocabulary of a double-bind situation by having them experience the double-bind situation through the game. And the game deck is enforcing this. And
real quick, before you go further, I'm just curious, like, do you upfront tell people that it has something to do with double binds, or do you let them intuit what the core challenge is that they're going to be experiencing?
It depends on the context of the players. And by that, I mean, like, if I'm playing it for giggles, then I don't need to do that, right? And we just have the experience, and then we can talk about it afterwards. But if I am trying to do it with intent, then yeah, the intent being like, we're going to talk about double binds, and you're going to have this experience, and then we're going to stop it in the middle, or we're going to, at the end of it, and then we're going to debrief. Then yeah, I would absolutely frame it up as double binds ahead of time. And part of that is just kind of like saying, do I show people a painting, or do you also put that little placard next to it, right, to talk about the painting? Yeah. And so yeah, there's that. So the game itself is meant to, I don't want to use the word immersion, but expose people to that dynamic, that communication dynamic, right, of a double bind. And so it's structured where players are a new tranche of employees in this corporate dystopian setting in the 1990s for this biogenic company called, Pinnacle Biogenics. And everything is framed a bit in kind of a corporate crypto fascist kind of a way. So it's like, here we are, we're going to, mankind has fallen, and look at all the despair and urban decay around you. And we're going to raise mankind back up to where we rightfully should be, kind of a thing, a return to greatness kind of rhetoric. And the game opens with the players engaging in a kind of a welcome initiation ritual to the company, where they kind of recite company mottos and talk to the other players about why they're there. And because it's a double bind game, this includes the players' characters talking about what they're trying to avoid, bad stuff on the outside world and why they're here, or who they're trying to help on the outside and why they have to be here. Right. So this is that of the 3 layers of injunctions that a double bind has. You've got the you need here, you cannot leave the situation necessarily. Right. So you've got this, I need to be here, I am trapped here. And then after you have this initiation ritual to the company, the game just is a deck, right? Is a series of a couple decks, one of a series of events that the company is walking you through. And I say events, but it's more like the players are talking around the water cooler every week, and they're kind of commiserating with each other and talking about the things that are going on. And the events represent the things worded in a way where you could just read it off the card first person if you wanted to. It's like, hey, I did this, da, 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 right? Or this situation happened to me. And they might be things like, hey, I received this invitation to a company masked ball that's going to be for new employees. It's a great opportunity to schmooze and things like that, right? And you then have these options to kind of talk to what your response is to this. And you have these character relationship cards that are also on view. And these are like just things like Abby, who works in accounting, whose secret you've always kept, or somebody on the outside world, like your mom, your elderly mom, who cares about your well-being, right? And there's always a kind of a bit of a phrasing with this that gives you a connection to them in terms of the relationship. And then there's these objects or things that you might need that the company offers you that are these things of value. Things like a healthcare plan that covers literally anything, and it's left to be a bit suspicious sounding, because like death, could it cover death? And you're like, yeah, it covers death. You could be fixed of that. These kind of creepy vibes, right? So everything's a bit ambiguously creepy. And the idea behind the game is, in the first part of the game, the events are staged where you are co-building the world a little bit. You're kind of introducing what some of the projects you're working on in Pinnacle Biogenics might be, like the name of it, what it might be about, right? So when you're tasked with something like optimizing a low-income neighborhood in order to achieve an objective, you might get to, as a player, determine what that objective is, and what optimizing it means. What does that mean? What does optimizing a low-income neighborhood mean? Does it mean removing everybody? Does it mean finding low-income housing for everybody? What does that mean? And
probably not the latter.
Well, it's up to the players. But in that first stage, you get that little bit of agentic power of co-building the world with the game. And throughout this process, the game is then giving you this second level injunction, right? Which is the second injunction, which is a directive saying you must do this, right, or else, right? You can come to the ball, or you don't move up in the world, right? Kind of a situation. And so the player knows that it's good for them to do the thing because the company wants them to do the thing, right? Or they're bad. Now, if they do it, oftentimes they have a limited tableau in front of them of these relationships and objects of value that they can keep. So they have to make some tough choices very early on about what ones to sacrifice, and by sacrifice I mean remove from their story. So they're kind of resolving it and they're done with it, or they're dismissing it, right? And what this looks like is flipping the card over if you're dismissing it, right? And I rejected this, it's gone. And when you do that, that binary is then saying, you've clearly made a choice in this game, and the game can respond to it because I know what that relationship is between the things on either side of the card. And so how this works is if you make a choice that then say dismisses or rejects and has you move from your tableau a character from the outside world, like your elderly mom, you resolve that storyline, she's done. That means then the game's like, oh, well, if you're willing to reject that relationship, maybe you're then willing to also hand wave away this other crazier thing that the company is going to ask of you. And so it starts incorporating some hallucinations for your character. And this is where things like, oh, the coffee machine has a weird black ichor leaking from it, but only you can see it. Or you swear you saw a spongy mass creature that kind of squealed at you in the men's room, right? Like, and things like that. And you're like, it's just a sponge, the janitor left there, right? So you can the game is asking you then to gaslight yourself if you want to get rid of those. Right? So if you're going to get rid of these hallucinations, you have to say, it's just the coffee machine just needs fixing, or the janitor just left a sponge and I've been up late, these kind of things. And this is because in the double bind situation, you only have like kind of 4 kind of trajectories that your character might be able to take. And this is because, let me back up a second, the third injunction in a double bind is that there's an abstracted layer, a conceptual layer that you are butting up against. So the idea is, for instance, you must optimize this low income neighborhood. That's the thing, the task. You must do this. But also, I'm a good person. Right. So these things might become in tension with each other. It's kind of like when the parent says to you, you have to clean your room, but you should be someone who wants to clean your room. Right? And it's like, there's no winning there. Because if I say, oh yeah, I cleaned it. Did I do it because you told me, or did I do it because I should want to do that? Right. And this thing can create tension that can slowly, if it happens enough in your life, break your reality, right? What does that mean? And one of the 4 trajectories that you can kind of find in this game, as well as in double binds, is one, you start just do whatever the company or the authority figure tells you to do. You just kind of abdicate all of that responsibility. You've become complicit in it, and you then start to reinforce and say, yeah, this is the right and good thing. I should just do whatever they say. And you find this in the company as well, when players in the game, where the players start to say, yeah, we are optimizing that neighborhood. This is the right thing to do. It's good for humanity, right? And you start repeating the company lines, and your character is going to be moving up in the world. And they might be doing it for character reasons where they think they're helping everybody near them because they're protecting the relationships that they have in front of them. They don't want to dismiss the cards of the people on the outside, for instance. They want to say, I have this healthcare plan that covers literally anything, and my elderly mom who cares for my well-being, I want to retain those. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes, right, to do that. So you get this complicit nature where you just kind of lean into it. The second is kind of trajectory characters will take is one where they keep their head down and just kind of say, I'm protecting my own. I don't like what I'm doing, and I don't like the situation, but I've got to do what I need to do to protect my mom or have the thing that I need, right? And this is the most common in a lot of these kind of fascist kind of things. Anyways, people keep their head down, they protect their own, and the machine keeps moving. So you enable the machine without liking it. The third is this trajectory where the players go crazy. They develop a psychosis. And this is one where they end up keeping those hallucination kind of cards. They start collecting them, and they don't dismiss them as like gaslight themselves and say, yeah, that was just a coffee machine that needs repairing. And their characters start saying, no, these are real. Things are happening. Mm-hmm. I'm going crazy. And no one believes them, right? Like other characters are either rejecting them, or they lean into the idea that they're hallucinating. And like, I'm seeing all these things. These things are going mad there. And the veil is pierced for that character. And they go crazy. The fourth is revolution, like burn it all down, right? And they say, these things are real, this company is wrong, and I'm going to blow it up, right? And they say the only way out is to just destroy it all. And so you can see like this, it becomes this radicalization kind of thread, right? Which is in the IP of this game, where it's part of this, larger IP of the Far Bodies universe, and this thing about hardcore punk kids who can astral project and all these things, and are working against the giant Lovecraftian style fascists, right? And so the idea is like, well, how do you radicalize these normies, right? And one way is if they're exposed to this, one of the paths they may take is self-radicalization.
And in general, have you noticed any trends about like what players tend to go for? Like, is there one that's significantly more kind of epic and fun, like the Revolution, that people really
Yeah,
tend to have a
yeah.
bias towards choosing?
I haven't noticed that. I mean, I've noticed a few trends, but I don't know if I can ascribe causality to it, right? So, or for instance, when I was testing in New Zealand, a lot of them would just burn the place down, and that might have just been
Right.
like that might have been just the people I was playing with, which are a lot more hardcore punk kind of oriented people anyway, and or just maybe they're kind of like, you don't tell me what to do, kind of New Zealand kind of sentiment. No way is fascism taking hold here, but playing in the U.S. with people here, a lot of them more were, I'm just keeping my head down. And right, or they just kind of
Yeah.
said, yeah, I'll do what the corporation says. Yeah. And which is weird considering, I think it's because they were role playing it obviously a lot, but not because they are taking their personal stance and saying like, I'm just going to roll with it. Yes, fascism is good. The other thing is because of the game plays, it's a deck, right? There's a bit of randomness there. So sometimes you get the order of events that are coming up, and the kind of relationships you have out really shape a lot of that narrative. So you might have a character who comes across at a key moment in the narrative a book with a hole carved in it, and it happens to have a map with all these weird back rooms and things mapped on there, and you might be like, what is this? And then if that's at the right time for your character, you might take it in a way where you think that there's an underground revolution already happening, and you're gonna connect up with it and then create that, right? And then revolt. But the game is also structured where it slowly removes your agency as players. So like I mentioned how in the early part of the game, you have a bit of co-creation with the game itself, create a game world, creating like, what's this program that you're optimizing the neighborhood for? Start step 2, the events don't ask you those kind of agentic questions. They just ask you to kind of make connections between things that already exist. Right. So it's more about what exists already on the board in terms of the board being the cards that are in play. It's just make these connections. Why did this happen? Why? And so it starts moving towards more explanatory, right? But not necessarily agentic in a wholly creative way. And that slowly diminishes even more towards the end, where it's not asking you questions like, what do you do about it? But it's more of just like, well, how do you feel about that? Right? You don't get any, like, these things are happening. Choose these. How do you feel about it, right? And so it just becomes this more of why did it happen, down to like, how do you feel?
And is that even the case in the revolution trajectory? Because you might think that would kind of be more of you claiming agency, claiming, that the ability to perturb the system and shift things in a serious way. But even in that case, is it like once you spark the spark of revolution, things just start kind of going down that path and you can't really control it anymore?
Yeah, the players who are going to be revolting, they will always frame things and in that way, right? So even when they're talking about how they feel about it, they start talking about and this is an interesting one. I'm glad you called that out, because I hadn't really thought about it too much before now, in terms of how do players frame their revolutionary language or gameplay in it when their agency is being removed. And a lot of it is they talk about it in whispers with each other as like character to character, right? They talk about what their future actions are going to be, even though they can't respond directly to the prompt in a way where it says, what do you do necessarily, but it does say things like, well, how do you react? Is the closest I think you get to what do you do. But they start talking about it in whispers, like, hey, we don't like this, do we? We're going to burn this place down. And then if they ever get the opportunity to kind of actively do something, and the last couple cards of the game always are very much a vague kind of prompt, things like a spark is lit, what do you do? And that one just returns all that agency. And it's very vague though, because it might just be, oh, there's a literal fire in the lab, or it might be, like the spark of revolution is lit, let's go boys, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that it just kind of floods it all back at the end. And so all those whispers they might have had with each other then become action again right at the end. So that, yeah, I'll have to look at that. The game is still in development, so I should cast a light on that more as it goes, as they follow that revolutionary track. What do they talk about in the game? It's good. But with the idea with double binds, the last bit about this is that those 3 levels of injunctions I talking about, you can't leave the situation. And the game asks you to have some conceptual, abstracted thing that you are putting in contrast with a directive, like an imperative, you must do this. The way out of it, the game does not let you do that. internally to the game. It does not let you leave this situation. And the best way to leave a double bind situation is to have a meta conversation about the way you're communicating, right? Because the double bind is a kind of a communication dynamic, and you need to be able to talk about how you're communicating, saying like, look, you're telling me this, but I'm feeling that this is an abstract thing that I'm in, that's being pitted against, right? And I feel like I don't have any power in this situation or whatever, right? And you have a grown-up conversation about that. The game doesn't allow that within the context of the game. And however, a debrief, or like if you frame the game at the beginning as this is going to be a game about double binds, and here's what double binds are, and then you kind of talk in the middle about how do you feel about your agency in the situation, what kind of concepts are being, what your character have that you're being pitted against, what do they value, what are they being told to do? If you kind of debrief these at the end as well, talking about how would you escape the situation, right? Then you're really getting into the education of a double bind situation, and that's where you can say, well, let's leave this. How could we leave this dynamic and change it? Of course, a lot of it in the end of a double bind requires that both parties recognize that it's a double bind, agree it's a double bind, and then want to do something about it, as opposed to like, no, you're in your rightful place, you're going to do what I say, right? And so that may not work.
That was going to be my follow-up. Yeah. I mean, have you found any, like in the debriefs or anything, any ways in which people are able to think about escaping double binds that still, have one toxic partner in them that wants to keep them in that double bind?
No, not in the debriefs that I've been having. I mean, if you look at the literature on double binds on how do you leave toxic relationships, then yeah, there's plenty, right? And there's plenty of kind of advice. Part of it's protective about always having an ability to leave that kind of agency. Like if you're economic, like, can you just leave your job? Like, never take a job that puts you basically in serfdom. Don't do that, right? Don't put yourself into these situations in the first place. The other would
Which
be,
unfortunately a lot of them are, right? Just, talking to some friends when I worked in corporate America, like the whole visa system and everything, the way they kind of entrap them is not great. So it's a reality.
It's a reality. Yeah. So part of this is about, can you recognize them so that you can avoid them? Or can you recognize them so that if you're in them, you can find a way out by finding external help? And the help being like, are there support systems for this person to leave in this kind of dynamic and then get the help they need because maybe they don't have any economic viability on their own. But that's looking at this game as a social active, like an action tool, right? Where really it's a game that you could then research how people respond to it as well. Like you could use this as a research tool, and that's where I want to make these games. And that's just an example of one that is in development right now, where I don't know yet where it's going to go. It was developed entirely for funsies at the beginning, and knowing that I say fun in terms of like it's part of this IP, this larger one where we wanted to say, hey, hardcore punks are what the players are normally going to be playing in this IP, but what if we looked at how people who are just part of the empire, right? How do they justify that, right? And part of it's trapped in a double bind, right? Keep your head down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical to have games, to have experiences like that really show people how it feels to be in the position of someone getting sucked down the path of whether it's just like a standard kind of corporate job that solely requires you to sacrifice morals, or something as extreme as fascism that really takes you all the way to hell and back, or maybe hell and stay there. I think it's just so easy to paint whether it's the CEO or a leader of a country or whatever that may be as like, an evil person who just, wants to burn down the world or just wants profit seeking or whatever it might be. But it's so often the case that they are facing the same dynamics that you are. They're just, facing them at a higher level. But there's, always various systems pressuring and incentive structures and everything that kind of keeps them locked in many ways, just as much as you may feel locked in as a lower level employee or cog in the machine. Just being able to inhabit that space, I think is pretty critical, and we don't get to experience that enough.
I agree. And the idea that like, it's a game not about the company itself as much as it is about the dynamic, right? So you're saying, what's the communication dynamic here? What's the choices I am making in this, and how do I how do I regard those? So yeah, it's important to recognize that it's just transferable, no, regardless of the cause of the other people in the relationship. Um, it is about what's the relationship look like in front of you, right?
It seems like in the game that you just described, there's kind of like, as you said, an agency funnel where people start out with more agency and lose agency over time. I've just been thinking a lot about like how to create games that actually give people more of a sense of agency and kind of allow them to inhabit what that might feel like, gaining agency over time, learning that, you're only kind of one small action away from learning something about yourself or having a new experience that changes the way you see the world, or meeting someone who can facilitate growth or just connection or whatever it might be. But have you thought at all about like games that kind of reverse that agency funnel that you were just talking about? Is that something you've messed around at all?
In terms of claiming agency.
Yeah.
Yes. Although I wouldn't say necessarily in the self-empowerment kind of a way. So in terms of agency, so there's another game I can talk to specifically, which is called Open the Chicken Coop. They're weird names for games, right? And this is a game with it was built with an Alexa unit, right? Like the little digital assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was made originally as part of a game jam about 7 years ago with Miranda Versuelen as a narrative designer. And the idea was you have a box of physical ephemera, right? Like things that someone would have left at their office. And incidentally, the game is centered around a fictional character called Katie Young, who worked at a biogenetics company, right? And the idea here was that we were combining real news articles with her fictional annotations on them, neatly organized in folders, along with all these artifacts like a plant and glasses that were busted and a chipped coffee mug and like all photos and tickets from like a conference travel and all this stuff. And you as players had complete agency about how you engaged with the game. So the idea was you were told one thing, which is to open the chicken coop. The directive was the name of the game. And you tell Alexa to open the chicken coop, and that launches the app. But when you launch the skill, the app, whatever, Alexa then is an unreliable narrator who is a friend of Katie Young's and doesn't know anything about the science that she was working on, but knows a bit about Katie's life. And so you can ask her questions about things in the box, and you've got to make a decision in the game, a singular mechanical decision, which is, do you release her research or do you destroy it? And the idea is, because you have complete agency about how you approach it, how you talk about it with the other players, while you're engaging with the game, the narrative, there are facts in terms of there's a ticket. Here's a literal ticket to a conference that was in like Russia in 2018 or something like that. But what is its meaning is left ambiguous on purpose, so that you might draw connections between it and something else that you discovered in the box that may or may not be true. There's no coded reality that you're necessarily uncovering. You are discovering some level of that, right? But the meaning you're imbuing on it. And when you do that, you create this chain reaction, right? Of like, oh, well, we decided that Ivan, whom she met at a conference, is actually involved in like biogenetic weapons or something like that, and is going to be using this research for terrible means. And you don't know that. That's never stated. That's not even a reality necessarily in the game, but you might get vibes off of Ivan, right? And because you've made that connection, you might make that connection. And when you make that connection, it colors everything else that you then see. So the order of things that you uncover then is reflected back on the narrative that you have created, along with physical artifacts propping it up. And as a result, the narrative is entirely your own. And granted, there is enough consistency to where people kind of get a shape of the universe, right, that is in the box, of the facts that are on the ground, and those don't change. But in terms of them weighing the risk of the research being bad, how could it be bad? What's the value of it being released? All of these things that come into the physical decision you've got to make of, do I release it or destroy it? are up to you, right? And so players will become very certain about their decision to destroy it or to release it. And another group might come to the complete opposite decision, but not necessarily because of the evidence, but because of their own opinions, right?
Yeah, that seems like a fascinating case study in
Yeah.
various cognitive biases and all of that sort of stuff.
and
Just
how
seeing
group decision is making.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is being slowly written up as a research article about how, here's another thing that we could use to find out how moral decision making happens in groups when they feel like there's more stakes than a trolley problem, right? And this is more of a dual use dilemma anyway than a trolley problem. But the idea of it being like, how do we co-develop this narrative and come to an agreement? What kind of dynamics are there between the players there? And the agency that you have to do this is like in a group. If you're playing this alone, I imagine it'd be quite different than playing with a group, right? Because your agency then is coming up against others who may come with a different. And how do you then convince them that the reality you're creating or the argument you have is more valid or more moral than the other one? In terms of people claiming agency, seeing how your agency comes into conflict with other people's agency in terms of creating the narrative is an interesting dynamic. And that's why this is an interesting research object.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of just like thinking across all the different games that you've made over the last years, how do you think about the risk of kind of like making the learning too visible? Like, this is a game that is supposed to teach you something versus just this is a fun game, and then, you know, after the fact, maybe you'll do a debrief or something along those lines. It's because it just kind of feels like if a player feels like they're being taught a lesson, that often sort of breaks the spell of the game. So how do you think about that tension a little bit?
That's such a big, it's actually a really big question, right? Is the game we're talking about an educational game where it's a very kind of closed, positivist kind of like, here's a fact and I'm trying to teach you these facts. And the whole point of this game is to teach you these facts. Or is
I'm thinking
to teach you a point of view.
Yeah, I'm thinking more on the level of like less of just what we talked about earlier in the episode of like a simulation or something, and more along the lines of the games we just talked about that are, you know, teaching you about double binds, or that are, you know, helping you think through cognitive biases and how to make group decision making more streamlined. That sort of level of things would be more where I'm asking this question about.
Yeah, so in regards to those games, which are a lot about, I'd say dynamic focused, right? Like if I've looked at this,
exactly,
used, perhaps I want to use MDA framework, right? The dynamic in the middle there is like the game is intentionally about that, examining the dynamic. Like any educational object, the education is part of a larger curriculum, and that curriculum ideally is connected to the learner, the student, the player. That person, people's values or actions they're taking, or life generally, right? So if you're coming in cold and you want to say, everything aside, here's something that'll appeal to you and you want to play this and then have an experience about it, you need to do a lot of immediate work to kind of make it connect to the player, student, learner, or whatever life, or why it's important, or not even important, but like why they might benefit from it, or why it might be interesting to shed light on a situation they're currently in, or whatever. And depending on the age group, you do that differently. And not even just age group, but depending on any demographic, right? Or the context. Are you presenting it in a school? Are you presenting it in an after school club? Are you presenting it in for fun in like a hobby games meetup in your local friendly game, store? Because I guarantee you, if you're presenting it, and I guarantee, but like if you're presenting it at a hobby game group, and you lead in talking about a game like about double binds, they're probably actually going to be more interested in it, because it's like, oh, it's a game with a concept behind it, right? And that's going to intrigue them, because maybe they're not exposed to games with that intent. And I hesitated there because I was about to call it the artistic intent, but they're not necessarily looking at a lot of games with intent. They're looking at like, this is a fun puzzle, a distracting puzzle, or a cozy game, right? If I'm looking at it with students, they might be saturated with it. And here's this teacher person coming in who's always got something to say in a lecture, or here's dad again with he's going to tell me about, he's going to tell me about evolution again, or he's going to tell me about facts, right? And it's like, you may not care. You might have tuned out. So again, the approach matters heaps in that. So I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry, Ari, on that one. As much as, like any educational object or any object, you need to kind of make it relevant and a bit sexy if it's going to be, and by that I just mean it's attractive to them on the surface of it, right? Before they get into it.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I do think just in general, there's, I think both you and I are kind of skeptical of the whole gamification sort of industry, which I really do feel has become an industry now. Maybe that's something we can actually touch on a little bit as well. But just kind of creating these games that are, so obviously designed just for the kind of, learning or, driving some ideas into your head, whether it's from a corporation or like an app or something that you just downloaded to help build habits or whatever. But they are so only nominally like a little bit of a game and mostly just like, an excuse to complete some objective and then gamify it lightly on top and in the kind of in a pretty superfluous way that doesn't actually feel fun. So I was just kind of thinking about that little tension between like, making a game that is purely just light gamification on top of something that you're supposed to learn versus making a game that is actually super immersive and fun and engaging, but then also has the side effect of teaching you something if you choose to focus on that element of it.
Because this is complex, I can only talk about it in anecdotes, right, to create a little narrative. Obviously, there's some sort of statistical reality here. But point is, do you know the game Prodigy?
No, I don't.
You can easily look it up, and you'll find studies about it in terms of maybe a bit sponsored studies by people trying to show that it has a lot of improvement for kids' math scores. So it's a maths game, ostensibly, because my son's played it. I've watched him play it when he was in school, and it's basically kind of like a adventure game, top down. You play it in the browser. You collect monsters, and then you do battles against other guys on your adventure. And whenever you're using your special abilities, it uses power, and you'll run out of power. In order to get more power, you got to answer maths questions, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. So that's where the maths comes in, directly, right? And this is where the students say, look, it's got maths, right? So they love this because largely they're not doing maths, largely directly, right? Most of the time they're not doing any maths. They're maybe engaging with a couple of maths questions every 5 minutes, maybe on a good day. Right? And the maths questions are going to be presented very much in your classic multiple choice. Here's a quick maths question using classic maths language of like 16 times 24 is which of these, or which of these shapes has, which of these shapes is a rectangle, depending on the level of maths. Like these are little kid maths. So then you get it right, you get power. If you don't get power. Ooh. And they recognize that as maths. Parents will recognize that part as maths. Teachers will recognize that part as maths. But the rest of it, there's nothing, right? Except you do get that trickle of like, if you're engaging with games and the games have numbers and your characters have stats and things, there's going to be maths involved, and you can kind of look at the relative power of different abilities and things like that. That you can say, oh, this ability does 15 damage. I like this one a lot more than this one at 10. Da, da, da. But that's a lot more the incidental on the side maths, which actually a lot of games are really good at. Right? But this game, I would say is terrible. But the kids like it a lot because they get to feel like they're just playing a game, and they really are just playing a game. And everyone else looks at a point and say, look, they're practicing math because there's quiz questions, practice questions, they're drilling, right? And so it appeals to a wide audience in that regard, because the kids get to feel like they're getting away with playing a game in an educational context. And they can say, no, look, I'm just going to play some Prodigy. I'm going to practice my math. I'm going to go play some Prodigy. And they love it. Prodigy loves it because they get a lot of subscriptions from schools. And so is it a gamification? Absolutely. Is it really not doing the best job? I would agree. It's not doing a great job at it. And are there ways to really subvert kids and make them feel like they're being subversive, which is a thing kids like to do a lot of, especially like boys in that age group, like 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, where they think getting something over on the grown-ups, right? And they get to play games. And if you make a game feel like a math game, feel like a game, and not drilling, they're happier about it. And then, right, and yeah, so it's Dragon Box, I think, was an old one as well that just kind of used like taught algebra concepts and was well lauded for being a puzzle game that felt like a game, but also was straight algebra using dragons and symbols and eggs as like the symbols instead of using X. It's a dragon, a purple dragon egg or something like that, right? Not that I'm going to prop that one up, but what I'm saying is that you can get a load of games that are gamification in terms of like not the using a game like mechanics in non-game setting, but the idea of I'm trying to get you to do a thing you may not want it to have done. Black hat kind of gamification and incentive structures, where students want to feel subversive, and then they're playing this thing, and then you got them to do maths practice. Right? So yeah, if it's overt, like that, the educational message, the idea is like, is it overt and linking into something they value already, which is feeling subversive about getting away with playing games in education context, right? That's how that linked in, right? In terms of gamification in these contexts, I don't like these giant megacorps that are selling their high quality, look at all the improvement in math scores, highly selective kind of studies they're doing that then say, look, they played Prodigy and they got better math scores. It's like looking at a medical intervention. It's not a medical intervention by any means, and it should be part of a much larger curriculum. It's like saying, you're not looking at the mechanics of it like a medicine as well. You're not looking at like the chemical, or you're not looking like the compounds in broccoli and looking at how those individual compounds in broccoli have a physiological effect on you, right? You're looking at a math game where you're incidentally engaging with maths, and then occasionally directly dealing with math questions, and trying to look at that in terms of a medical in the same way you would a medical intervention. I don't think that's very effective. So I've got a lot to talk about the gamification thing, but I'm interested in when you're talking about gamification.
Yeah, it was funny because I was actually more thinking of the other end of the spectrum of like gamification that is applied, either by corporations or just that you self-enroll in by, downloading an app like Habitica or something like that from the App Store. But yeah, I was thinking more that other end of the spectrum where it's like you are trying to apply gamification to your life, to things that, one, maybe don't need to be gamified, and two, like the way that they do it is so barely fun that it's just like, you get a badge or a new suit of armor or whatever it might be. But it's not exactly a thrilling, engaging experience where you feel like you are a character you care about that has some agency in a world that you're exploring, that you're meeting characters along the way. It's just, it is what it is. And, you're going to do those habits, or you're going to, do the corporate training because you get a badge at the end of it. And that was kind of more of the end of what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm further on in your camp on this as well, I think. Like in terms of why, like there's plenty of research about the extrinsic motivators removing the intrinsic motivation that people might have, particularly if it's unrelated, right? And by that I mean, like, if I'm extrinsically motivated by getting the cool swords and armor in my game, and not motivated by the workout plan that I've got, and that I've got to adhere to in order to get ticked off in the Habitica app or whatever, then it's not going to make me intrinsically motivated. Granted, you're trying to psychologically trick yourself anyway.
Right.
So I'm not going to discount the people who do find value in that. But the broader thing you're talking about of like, do I put timers on your hotel reservations? Do I do little psych tricks that are less games and more of like razzmatazz mechanics and gamification techniques to trick you into do something you wouldn't want to normally do, even in the good sense of like, well, you came to the website to book a hotel room, and I'm just encouraging you to book a hotel room. You're just still being overtly psychologically manipulated, and it doesn't feel great. To be aware of that. So yeah, I'm in your camp on that. I'm not a big fan of it. But what is the alternative? Maybe we can propose some things right now. What would you propose as a, not necessarily just saying what's an intrinsically motivated way of doing it, but what's a way that you, designer of games who do this, would help build some habits?
Well, I mean, that's absolutely kind of the intersection I find myself at right now, having released Just Roll with it. And you know, having some skepticism, as just mentioned, about gamification and trying to overly quantify various elements of your life that should maybe remain unquantified. Um, so I would say, in terms of building habits, I thought about it at a couple of different levels. Um, one being that, like, I'm not really there to help you track every little thing that you're doing and get points for all those little things. Although, there is some of that. There's more of that if you want there to be more of that. But I'm more there to kind of help you set a direction that you want to move towards, and to make that direction feel like it's part of something a little bit more epic, something a little bit more playful, something a little bit more full of joy. So that was kind of one way I thought about it. It really is like, it's not about reducing the scope of things and quantifying everything until, you reach some numerical goal or whatever it might be, and more about setting a general direction that, as long as you're working towards that general direction, the story will continue to unfold. You'll continue to feel some wins along the way, and it will just kind of, in that sense, be fun. I think like narrative and story and feeling a part of a story was a big thing that I kept coming back to. Um, but I also don't know. I think it's really it's a tension that I feel in myself kind of every day. Like, I think there are some things that, by quantifying them, you start to lose some of the magic. You start to lose some of the intrinsic motivation. And I guess it's just a question of where you fall on the line of, like, tricking your mind to do things for external things until you then start noticing the internal rewards, and those start to take over as your primary motivator. And I'm not totally sure where the balance is there, because for me, that is sometimes the way I work. I have to, give myself external rewards, or have some impending doom deadline in order to trick myself into getting shit done, or, going to the gym or whatever it might be. But then ultimately I go to the gym not because I'm rewarding myself in any way, but because I notice that there are intrinsic internal rewards to going to the gym, that I feel more stable, that I feel more mentally clear. Like today I skipped going to the gym, and I noticed that, like, I'm struggling to complete sentences, and that's not normally how I speak. And, like, those sorts of things, that as you start to notice them more, they become internally motivating, because you want to be a clear, cogent person that can explain themselves well. So those, you know, I think that's kind of up to each person to decide. Like, the balance between intrinsic and extrinsic. But I just wanted to create tools that allow people to kind of do a little bit of both, that allow them to find some pathways to reward themselves, to do so in a way that's fun and engaging, while at the same time paving a pathway towards more introspection that then will allow you to connect to not just internal motivators, but also, like, for lack of a better word, like meaning motivators. Like, I'm doing this because it matters to the people around me. It matters to the world. If I also, like, go to the gym, I can show up better for those people I love, because I will feel more stable and level-headed and things like that. Yeah. Anything resonate in there or spark any curiosity or thoughts?
Completely. And I do want to, so there's a few things that I want to echo with what you're saying, like, and maybe for the listeners, distill, right? Is like, one, I completely agree with this, valuing trajectory over KPIs, right? And trying to obsess and have anxiety over the number of 261 points of workout versus 500 points of workout that you got, or calorie counting over the long term. And valuing process over the outcome, like, and enjoying that process. And I say that because there's a way of locking in on that intrinsic motivation you have for the thing you're doing, enjoying the thing you're doing, as opposed to the cookie you're getting at the end. And the third thing that I agree with is the mix of intrinsic and extrinsic, particularly the timing of it, right? And without trying to habit max, right, or whatever you want to call this idea of, like, how can I hack my life, right? This idea that the metrics, the number metrics, and I did a talk about this a while ago, and it was based off of some data on like call centers and data that they would collect on all the people who worked in call centers and motivating them to do stuff. And it's basically a hellscape. Right? But some of the things that come out of this is when do you use the metrics and when do you not use the metrics, right? And the idea is if you're trying to instigate a change, right, having an extrinsic motivator is actually really quite good up front because you're changing behavior, right? You're changing a trajectory. So you say like, let's collect a bunch of data and then there's a metric and we figure out that turns out that let's talk about something that's people can relate to. The rubbish in your house, like things accumulate, right? Maybe it's winter time. Yeah, there are a lot of stuff in your house, right? And people are getting ready for a spring cleaning or something like that. And so they could look around the house and they could have a metric in mind and say like, look, all these rooms are dirty. We've collected all these things, right? And you can count the things if you wanted to. You do an inventory, and then if you wanted to extrinsically motivate, you say, all right, we're gonna have a big clean, right? And we do the big clean. We're gonna go to the movies, right, afterward. Right? We're going to do this. We complete the list. We go to the movies. Incredibly extrinsically motivated in terms of we're not doing it for the cleaning. We're doing it to go to the film, perhaps, as the reward afterwards. But it's a change in trajectory, right? And it's a big action. Right? So extrinsic motivators are really good there. Big action, big one-off kind of things, and also in encouraging that new path of habit, right? As long as you decrease it till it's gone. Otherwise, the extrinsic motivators, you know that it becomes the reason you do it, the extrinsic motivator, and not the intrinsic one. So enjoying the process is the other half of that, of like, why do you go to the gym? And eventually it's for the way it makes you feel, and maybe you even like the while you're doing it, you like doing it, right? After a while, and you notice if you don't, right? Those kind of things are, yes, internal. The external thing people might argue is like, well, I want to be cogent, as you said. I want to be cogent in my discussions, and that's extrinsic. You care about how people value you, whatever, right? The line is blurry,
Yeah.
right? But it's a non-metric. It's not like tracked. It's not a number, and it's a thing you feel inside about why you want to do it. It's not
Exactly.
And it's why you want to do the thing. It's not, I like films and I really just want to do anything I can to go to the films, right? I don't know why I'm using movies as the motivator here, but the idea then is
Still
like,
relevant.
if you can you can notice them by saying like, if you can feel that people would cheat the process to get the thing, then clearly there's a misalignment because they don't care about the process, they care about the thing, and they're willing to cut corners or cheat it in order to do the thing, to get the prize. But it's not really cheating if you're also, it's not what is cheating. If you love the process and you're setting a trajectory for exercise, right? People will find that any level of movement, like I can say like, all right, I'm gonna do a low pace yoga kind of a thing today because I'm low energy. That's fine, right? It's fine. The trajectory is you've set aside in your mind time where you're going to work out or you're going to move your body or whatever, right? And you just can tick in your mind, yep, I moved my body today. When do you start feeling like you cheated yourself? And you're like, I laid on the couch and I walked to the bedroom 6 times, and back and forth to the fridge. So I moved my body. You're cheating yourself, and if you do that, then like clearly, maybe there's a problem in the process, like you're ticking the box, right? That's a problem. So yeah, trajectory, process, careful sprinkling of extrinsic motivators that are in alignment with your goals.
Right. And at moments of change when you actually need to shift from, yeah. Awesome, Richard. Well, I think before we go, let me just ask you one last question, which is, what's a game that changed your life? Either because it was just so damn fun and you loved it and you built relationships around it, or because maybe in some way it kind of changed how you viewed the world.
So because it's so easy to have life-changing experiences when you're younger, I am going to pick one from when I was younger. And there was a series of like first-person role-playing games, right? In the old like D&D kind of style, we have an overworld map, and then you come in and things like Dark Queen of Grin, right? Like some of your listeners might know these ones. And those were life-changing, not because of their message or anything like that, but because of how the scope of those games impacted me, where it also felt like when I was doing physical role-playing, like my older brother made his own physical role-playing game called Dungeon Quest, and I was like 6 or 7 when we started playing the game, right? And when I was playing those video games, it felt like I was playing those games, and it felt very accessible. And I felt like, oh, I could make these, right? And so playing Dark Queen of Krynn or playing Ultima 4 on the Nintendo Quest of the Avatar, all of those games, that one which felt like it had a real depth to it because of the way you created your character and you had a values system, those changed my life in terms of looking at and still to this day reflecting on games like Ultima Quest of the Avatar, where games could have meaning through the systems that are there and how they ask you as a player to think about how you're approaching other characters or approaching those situations. And am I approaching this with humility, right? Which is one of the values in Quest of the Avatar. And granted, as a kid, those might be easy to swallow and don't look so blunt as they might as a grown up, more cynical as a grown up or whatever. But they were life changing because they really set me on a trajectory of like looking at games as rich experiences and not just arcade shooters, right? Or simple diversions. And ever since then, I have been making games since I was like 7, 8 years old, making my own role playing games to echo my older brother's one, right? And tried to make them with these rich experiences with tough choices and trade-offs, etc. Yeah, I'd say that's it. That set me on the path.
Beautiful, Rich. Well, you are absolutely doing that. You're, yeah, it's amazing to talk with you. It's amazing to hear about the work you're working on, and excited to hear when whatever you're next doing hits the market and people can start getting their hands on it. So just, when that happens, let me know. I'll let my audience know as well. I think everyone should check out all the work that you're doing. And in the meantime, best of luck with everything you're working on. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Harry.
All right. Bye, everyone. Till next time.